Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I think we'll get started. It is 4 o'clock and we've got a pretty full schedule. You will be hearing from a mix of Fair Districts PA volunteers, some very new to advocacy, some more experienced. You'll be hearing from some of our most experienced advocacy advisors and our legislative director, Pat Beaty. You'll also be hearing from two of our two representatives from Pennsylvania state representatives, Representative Delissio and Representative Thomas. And you'll have some time to ask questions. We'll be talking about advocacy, the ways that we do advocacy. Some people will be sharing their personal experience of advocacy, and we'll be talking about how to advocate together for a fair, transparent redistricting process. Our goal is to meet with every Pennsylvania legislator on this issue in the month of March or shortly after the month of March, and to have constituents talking with their legislators about why this issue matters so much. Anybody can be an advocate, and we believe that our representative government works best when we all participate. Our legislators encounter lots of complex issues through the course of their work, and it's really important for them to hear from constituents about why issues like redistricting matter, how those issues impact the community, and what we would like to see done about those issues. We don't have to be experts to do that. We just have to care, and we have to be willing to tell our stories. So we're going to start by hearing from a few volunteers who are going to share their experience, and then they'll be introducing Tony Crocomo, who's going to give us a little bit of advocacy training. Pat Beaty will talk about the bill that we are supporting, and then we will hear about the campaign that we are in the middle of, March Toward Transparency. We'll have some time to ask questions. We'll hear from the legislators, and we'll hear from some more volunteers. So as I said, it's a busy schedule. You'll hear from lots of us. And I think one really important part of this is for us to say, this is not some lobby firm from Washington, D.C. This is not some AstroTurf group with no real people on the ground. We have people in every single district in the state. We have supporters in every county. Every legislator has constituents who care about this issue, and we want to make that as clear as we can to every legislator that people across the state want a fair redistricting process, and we do not want to see gerrymandered maps again in 2022. So that being said, this is being recorded. It is being live streamed on all of our Facebook pages, and the recording will be shared on our YouTube channel as soon as it's ready. If you have questions, please post them in the Q&A. If you see questions you like and you really want to have answered, please thumb them up so that they get more attention. We will be answering some of the easy questions in the Q&A as we go along, and we will have some time to answer questions when we get to them. And you never know, some of your questions may be answered during presentations from people who are going to be talking. Our first volunteer to share with you today is Gil Haven. He'll introduce himself, tell you where he's from, and share a little bit of his own story in advocacy. Thank you for being with us today.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Carol. My name is Gil Haven. I'm from Philadelphia, and I'm a recent college graduate, and I'd like to tell you all about my experience contacting two different state representatives, state legislators. First off, the one where I went to college, who didn't care about the college town because she got most of her votes from the suburb next to the college town, and there's a very different demographic between the two. And so whenever I would go to talk to her, in her office or email or call to try to get a meeting with her about some of my favorite things, fair government, voting rights, green spaces in our communities, she would often just rebuff me and my fellow college students because she didn't care. And I thought that was about being a college student, but I came to learn that it had a lot more to do with a lot of other things. Most specifically, gerrymandering. I saw this again when I came home to Philadelphia. My local state rep didn't care about me doing the same thing, going and trying to meet with them about fair districts things or anything about the community. And when I saw that both of these state legislators were in safe districts, I was like, this is not fair. Why would my state legislator not listen to me, someone who's voting or who has the opportunity to vote for them or against them, why would they not listen to my concerns, what I care about, what I want, and I think our community can be better for our community. And I felt really hard done by, and I thought a lot of that was because I was a young person. And like I said, it was a lot of actually of what it was about. It was that these districts are gerrymandered to be specifically towards one type of person, so that our legislators don't have to care about every single person in their district. And I think that that's pretty appalling. I went up to one of these legislators at an event once, and I said, "Hi, I'm Gil. I'm the person who's called you 15 times, in the last month, and I've emailed you 25. And I've, talked to every single person on your staff, and they keep rebuffing me. Can we sit down and we talk about these things? Because I feel like these are really important for our community." And they were, nice as politicians are in person, and then never got back to me. And I continued, and I, just felt really, really hard done by. So in the end, it took a lot out of me to continue to go and talk to these people, but I realized that that's what you have to do. You just have to continually, over and over and over again, put yourself out there and make sure that they know that you care and that you want to help them do their job. And when they learn those things, maybe they will actually follow through. Luckily for me, my local state rep left office, and we have a brand new one who next week I will be talking to them about the LACRA Bill, which we'll hear about a lot more today. And I'm really excited for that meeting. It's a brand new state rep, and it means I get a fresh slate to really build a relationship with them and allow myself and them to really change the community for the ways we want to. So thank you so much for having me today. I'd love to pass it over to Rosanna.
All right. Hi, as Gil mentioned, my name is Rosanna Dinicola-Krick, and I'm from the Applewood community in Fogelsville. That's just outside of Allentown, or otherwise known as Lehigh County. And I've lived here in the US for over 20 years and became a citizen only in early 2019. Although I was somewhat involved in advocating for my local community and volunteering on election campaigns before citizenship, it was after becoming a citizen that I took a more active role and involved more meaningfully by petitioning my local legislators on issues of concern to me. So in this time, speaking with both federal and state legislators, I've learned some things to do and not do that I found were better received and got me further in acquiring support for my particular issue. First of all, meeting in person with my legislators is better than phone calls and emails, especially those emails where you just have to click a button and you have a bunch of pre-worded talking points and automatically get you to your legislator. I spoke with one of the legislators that I spoke with. He, in fact, told me the very exact thing. He spoke, I spoke with him, and he tells me that he holds his constituents' personal stories in higher regard than letters from special interest organizations. Although I didn't have the heart to tell him that these special interest organizations are made up of his constituents. And just today, I was able to observe another webinar in which the US senator spoke, and he himself also reiterated that you can't underestimate the power of individual stories when participating in grassroots advocacy. So in that regard, I find a way to work in on how I studied for citizenship and how I am now giving back and teaching citizenship classes through my church. I take, taking references from the Constitution is also a great way to influence a legislator on whether a proposed bill meets some basic basics of good governance or not. You can always go back to the Constitution. I found that being proactive instead of reactive is also better. So not just give reasons to oppose a particular bill, but perhaps understand the underlying objective of the proposed bill and provide alternative legislation or ways that could better accomplish that original goal or reasonable goal. And I found that very helpful when I was advocating for HB 38, right? Or opposing for it. I also found that when I researched the legislator's background and stance on a particular issue, or how they voted in the past on similar bills, I could thank them for their support on issue XYZ and use it as a kind of lead off to discuss why I support or oppose a particular bill. And I found that tool on the website, the PA General Assembly locator tool. That was very helpful to get the different bills that my legislators supported or co-sponsored, or how they voted. And finally, and I can't, this one, there's a funny story behind it, but I'll just give you the general. You can be well informed on your position and remember that it is okay to disagree, but don't argue or threaten the legislator or the member of the staff if you happen to be on a phone call. If he or she disagrees with your stand, okay, so don't be belligerent. A polite and informative tone is always best. And if you approach anything close to righteous indignation, you may get a defensive reaction, and if not, an awkward and swift end to the discussion. So I would say just keep in mind that you want to use, you might need this legislator to this person's support on future issues. And so having said that, given my experience now, these are the do's and don'ts, I'd like to introduce you to Tamara Gray, who's also a volunteer.
Thank you. Hi, yes, I'm Tamara from Bucks County, PA, and I've met with my state legislators or their staff just 4 times. Advocating for me is a really rewarding experience. It makes you feel more informed and more connected. If you've never spoken to your state legislator before, then this is the perfect time to do it, and this is the perfect topic to do it about, because redistricting reform, redistricting transparency is something that almost everyone in the state is in agreement about 2/3 of the population. I'm going to use my 4 minutes to tell you 5 things that I've learned as an advocate for fair districts. And then I'm going to leave you with 1 tip. The first thing is, for me anyway, it was much easier than I thought it would be. If you have ever given your opinion to anyone about anything, then that's what it's like. Only now you're going to be giving your opinion to someone whose job it is to actually consider your opinion. If you've ever complained about something that's happening in the state or something that's not happening in the state, it's because, or because of the gridlock that's happening, then now you're going to be talking to someone that can actually do something about that complaint. It's that simple. That brings me to the second thing that I learned. My state legislators, both my representative and my state senator's legislative staff, both thanked me and expressed to me how much they enjoyed speaking to constituents. And so for me, I learned that it's actually that my legislators want to hear from me and they want to hear from their constituents. Think about it. This is a government of the people, by the people. Well, how can we expect our legislators to do things and act on our behalf if we never reach out and talk to them? They can't do what we want if all we're doing is telling our neighbor or our Facebook friends how we feel about things. We have to talk to our legislators. It's that simple. The third thing that I want to tell you about is that if you don't know everything, that's not a problem. You don't have to worry about a legislator asking you a question that you don't know the answer to. If you find that you don't know something, then just jot it down and tell them that it's a great question and that you'll get back to them. Fair Districts has a wealth of knowledge. Just ask someone at Fair Districts after you hang up and they will help you, point you in the right direction and get you an answer, and then just follow up. The fourth thing that I've learned is that you really have to listen carefully when you're meeting with your legislators. One time I met with my legislator and they said very supportively and very enthusiastically, your opinion is really important to me. I'll definitely consider it when I vote. When I heard that, in my excitement and in my limited experience, I thought, oh, they're going to vote my way. They're going to vote exactly how I want. And I hung up, and then I went to go write my legislative meeting notes for fair districts. And I realized that they didn't actually say that they were going to vote the way that I wanted them to. What they said was that they would consider how I'd like them to vote. And so now I like to clarify and try to get a little bit more of a commitment before I leave a meeting. So I'll say, I just want to make sure that I understand your position. Are you saying that you will co-sponsor LACRA? And if the answer is anything other than yes, then I recommend that you say, what information can I provide to you that will help you feel more comfortable being a co-signer? It's that simple. And then just follow up. The fifth and final thing, and the most important and best thing that I've learned, is that advocacy works. Both my state senator and my state representative are co-signing or are co-signers right now on LACRA. And I just want to leave you with a tip that I have. Use your resources. Fair Districts PA has legislative briefs, and they will give you a quick little snapshot of your legislator and help you find a way to make a connection with them. When I start speaking with my legislator, I like to briefly mention something that I know that they're interested in. Maybe it's, before we get started, I just want to thank you for getting that grant for clean water or for passing that bill last year. I really think it's going to be helpful to the community. Or if you don't know very much about your legislator, if there is no legislative brief for fair districts, then you can just say, thank you for your weekly legislative emails. They really help me stay informed. And I think if you mention your appreciation for something that they're interested in and something that they're doing, it lets them know that you're paying attention and that you respect and appreciate their efforts, which I think makes them more likely to be agreeable to an issue that's important to you, like LACRA. And to finish, I just want to say that you do not have to have any special skill set in order to go and speak to your legislators. All you have to do is have an opinion and be willing to voice it. It's that simple. And now Tony's going to give us some advocacy training.
We have a horror meeting with our legislators because we think maybe we're not prepared. We don't know enough. They have a lot more information than we do. And we're very, very afraid. But there's no need to be afraid, as Tamara said. It's easy to do. There's plenty of resources. And the legislators actually welcome input from their constituents. So, what is the advocacy approach? Well, you're not going to do this alone. What we're trying to do is get captains to organize teams to go as a group to meet with the legislator. And not only go as a group, but to prepare as a group. And this allows us to share the responsibility so it doesn't fall on one person's shoulder. You have mutual support among the team. You have shared preparation. You work together, and this builds confidence. Built-in backup. You don't have to worry about hitting every point. If there's an important point that needs to be hit and you forget to do it, somebody else on the team will do it. And it really does build confidence. You go in there and you're going to be competent. You're going to represent yourself well. You're going to have a conversation. You're going to listen, and it builds confidence. And a meeting is essentially setting up the ask. And right now the ask is quite simple. You want to ask your legislator to co-sponsor LACRA, Senate Bill 222, House Bill 22, the Legislative and Congressional Redistricting Act that adds transparency and accountability to the redistricting process. Now, captains, we're looking for captains to organize the teams, and this is just a brief guide to the entire process. And there are other training materials on Fair District's YouTube channel. You can see a more in-depth presentation on training. There's going to be training tomorrow night for captains, and tomorrow night is the first one, then there's another one scheduled, I believe, on the 10th. You volunteer to be a captain, and you'll be getting a number of potential team members to contact, and you form the team. And with the team, you define the roles on the team. Now, this process specifically has several roles on the team. You have the team leader, captain, can be the captain, can be somebody else on the team. The team leader that serves as the moderator for the group. This is your meeting. You put the agenda together. You have a topic to talk about. It's your meeting. So the team leader puts the agenda together. You also have someone who takes notes. And this is very important. This allows everybody else on the team to be part of an organic conversation with the legislator, but you have somebody there capturing the important points the legislator is making. Then you have 2 or 3 members of the team will tell their values-based story of why this issue, redistricting reform, is important to them. And Tamara mentioned that, and as did Rosanna. She talked about how important it was, and Gil shared his frustration with meeting with somebody who's in a safe district. So that's a story that can be used. The captain schedules the meeting. Now, it doesn't specifically have to be the captain himself or herself. It can be one of the team members, but you make sure the meeting is scheduled. And you want to make sure that there is one point of contact for this meeting between the team and the legislator's office. You don't want 2 or 3 people contacting the lawmaker's office about this. You want one point of contact. And that's often the note taker would be doing that, but it doesn't have to be. And then the entire team, the team leader, the note taker, the people telling them what brought me here stories, do research on the legislator. And the research consists of basically looking for something that you can thank the legislator for, but you're also looking for connections. You're looking for what high school did the legislator go to? What college did the legislator go to? What was their major? Where do they live? And you're just looking for connections. Are they a member of the same civic organizations that you belong to? Are you both Rotarians or belong to the Lions Club? Are you both members of the League of Women Voters? You're looking for connections, small connections. The more you can say, we have these things in common, the better it is for the meeting. And then you prepare your what brought me here stories. And again, your what brought me here stories are values-based stories on why this issue is important to you. And you have to drill a little bit deep for these. You can't say, well, you shouldn't say, it's because it's the right thing to do. It certainly is. Redistricting reform is the right thing to do, but why do you believe it's the right thing to do? What happened in your life that made this issue important to you? And it had to be something because, and I say this often, but I think it bears repeating, we are not normal, those of us who are involved in this. Less than 50% of the people that can register to vote actually register to vote. Very few people actually visit their legislators or write letters to the legislators or send them emails. It's just not the bulk of the constituents that do that. So we are a small minority of people who want to meet with legislators. So there is some reason that you want to do this. And getting to the nub of that, why it's important to you. Was it a civics teacher in high school? Was there somebody in your family that really valued the ability to vote and the idea of districts being rigged to make those votes meaningless really upset you? There's something that has you do this, and you get to the number that, and you share that story. And Tamara said that, I'm sorry, Rosanna said that you can't, one of the legislators told her that you can't underestimate the power of personal stories. And that's why we tell them. Again, they can make a connection. You can argue with opinions. I think this, I think we ought to have redistricting reform. You can argue that. But I think redistricting reform is important to me because when I was in high school, I had a civics teacher who taught us about how valuable our vote was, and redistricting, the gerrymandering undermines that, and that's just anti-democratic, anti-American, unethical. That's That's the kind of story. And you need to prepare the ask. And again, the ask right now is pretty simple. Please co-sponsor Senate Bill 222, House Bill 22. If you're talking to the chair of the State Government Committee, please give a hearing to House Bill 22, Senate Bill 222. If you're talking to a member of the State Government Committee in the House or the Senate, please promote House Bill 22, Senate Bill 222 in your committee. Those are the simple asks that we're doing. And then another nice thing about the team's process, advocacy team process, you get to rehearse. You get to run through the meeting. And there are forms available, that materials will be provided, have been provided, that allow you to define your roles, pick your roles, put them together, and actually put an agenda together for the meeting. And then you meet with the legislator. You conduct, and it really is a pleasure to do. It's not a horror. We tend to think, many of us tend to think that the legislators know more than we do. But honestly, with very few exceptions, unless the bill you're discussing with the legislator, unless that bill is in his or her committee, chances are they haven't read it. They don't have a good knowledge of it. All they know about the bill perhaps is what they've heard from their party leadership. And perhaps what they've heard from their party leadership is not the representation of the bill that you would give them. So they get to hear your take on the bill, their constituents' take on the bill, and that's very important. And then afterwards, you debrief as a group, and then you report to fair districts, and that allows fair districts to conduct a educated guess on how that legislator is going to vote on the bill and where we need to put our efforts. And it's very important. Doing this is great, but doing this without the report makes it less effective as a tool. And those are basically the eight roles for legislators, legislative meeting. There's, again, more training going to be tomorrow night, 7 p.m. And there is training, recorded sessions of training that's available on the Fair District's YouTube channel. And now you're going to hear from Pat Beaty, who is our legislative guru, and he's going to give us LACRA talking points.
Okay, thank you, Tony. So Legislative and Congressional Redistricting Act, or LACRA, that's what we're talking about today, and those are the bills that we support. The idea behind LACRA is that while legislators' roles in the process are not going to change, there's not going to be an independent commission, we can still have rules in place that make it harder for them to engage in partisan gerrymandering and guidelines for the courts to test whether or not the maps are fair. The bills are, as Tony mentioned, House Bill 22 and Senate Bill 222, introduced by Representative Thomas and Senator Boscola. They're now in print. They've been referred to the committees on state government in both the House and the Senate. Thank you. So I'm going to get into some of the specifics, the details of the bills, but I want to follow up on the what Tony was talking about, which is the ask. We're asking legislators to support the bill. We're asking them to co-sponsor. And so I want to talk a little bit about why all legislators should be interested and willing to support LACRA, other than the obvious reason, as Tony said, that it's the right thing to do. But some legislators may be reluctant to co-sponsor LACRA for a variety of reasons. In particular, senators and reps who are not members of the state government committee may not be familiar with the current redistricting process. Others will say they prefer not to take a position on bills that have not been reported to the full Senate or the House for a vote. So here's a few reasons why I think all legislators should consider supporting LACRA. The first, as already mentioned, the process remains in the hands of the legislature. Unlike prior proposals, LACRA does not take the process away from the General Assembly and give it to a Citizens Commission. Secondly, the current process is done in secret with very few rules. That only helps the leaders of the two parties maintain control over rank and file members and keeps them in the dark about how the lines are drawn. LACRA has an open process that allows members of the public and legislators an opportunity to participate in meaningful ways. Individual legislators can speak in support of local communities, in support of keeping local communities together, and can even submit maps that best reflect local interests. And finally, it's often been said that good government is good politics. In other words, legislators should support LACRA because LACRA gives voters what they want most, a government that's more transparent and responsive to voters' needs. So one of the emphases in LACRA is on transparency. And we deal with that in a number of ways. One of which is to have a website, a really robust, user-friendly website for members of the public to get information about the redistricting process, to be able to view maps that have been proposed, submitted, public comments that have been submitted, submit their own maps for consideration by either the Legislative Reapportionment Commission or by the committees on state government in the House and Senate when it comes to congressional redistricting. So the bills would also require the committees and the Legislative Reapportionment Commission to review maps and to give consideration to maps that were submitted by members of the public. Further, with regard to transparency, the bills require multiple hearings on a statewide basis in regional hearings, which would be, and all meetings and hearings subject to the Sunshine Law. And at the end of when a map is drawn, it must also include a written report of the rationale for the map, explanation for why municipalities or counties or other subdivisions were split, why was it necessary, and so forth. In addition to the transparency aspect, LACRA, the other key aspect I think of LACRA is that it provides some clear and measurable criteria to be used in the mapping process. For example, there is a specific provision that protects racial and language minorities against discrimination. The bill also outlaws district plans that protect incumbents or unfairly discriminate against political parties. The bill also includes the existing mandate in the state constitution that says that legislative districts must be compact and contiguous and must not split counties and other political subdivisions unless absolutely necessary. And that provision in the Constitution currently applies only to legislative districts, state legislative districts, House and Senate, does not apply to congressional districts. So LACRA would apply those same restrictions to congressional districts as well. The bill would also explicitly prohibit dividing voting precincts. There are some additional secondary, what we call secondary mapping criteria that if the first criteria can be met, then the commission or the committees, the legislature for congressional redistricting can consider additional criteria, including keeping communities of interest intact, being responsive to changes in voter preferences as measured by widely accepted tests used by experts. And districts should conform, but the district's boundaries should conform to natural boundaries in the environment like rivers and mountains. I want to say one more thing about something that's gotten some notoriety recently, which is the fact that the data needed to draw the lines for both state legislative and congressional districts is going to be delayed. And what normally would have been available to the commission and to the legislature as a whole by the end of March. The data needed to draw those districts is now not going to be available until the end of September, which is 6 months late. That is going to compress the timeline for completing redistricting before the next election cycle. It seems likely, as some have already noted, that the primary may have to move from May until July of next year. But even though that is an unfortunate reality, and it's going to affect incumbents and potential candidates running for office, it also presents an opportunity for us and for LACRA, because it now provides more time for the legislature to focus on the LACRA bills, public hearings if necessary, committee meetings to consider the bills, amend them if that's considered desirable, and then report them to the floor of the Senate and House and get them through both chambers. So we now have additional time for that to happen. And the legislators do not have an excuse to say that there isn't enough time to consider LACRA. So there's a little bit of a silver lining to the delay that's otherwise going to be difficult for the commission and the legislature to deal with. So really, if LACRA is passed by the end of June, let's say, which would be the most desirable, I think, then there's plenty of time to implement the reforms over the summer, get them ready and get them in place for when the data arrives at the end of September. Okay, that's kind of a quick thumbnail on the LACRA. We have lots of other information on the website, and I will now turn it over to Shayla Garg.
I'm Shayla Garg, and I'm a resident of Chester County. I have recently joined Fair Districts PA as a volunteer, and I'm thrilled to be here. I was previously involved in voter education and South Asian voter mobilization for the last 2 election cycles. I came across enough voter apathy and disenfranchised young first-time voters or new voters who don't have faith in the process, who refuse to take part in any of the change-making activities because they feel their voices won't be heard, or they simply feel it doesn't matter who we vote for. So instead of becoming an armchair critic and instead of simply dissociating with the whole process, like many others, I chose to become an advocate, to be the voice for the people who have something to say, to bridge the gap. Advocacy for me is a mechanism that bridges the gap between the legislators and their constituents. Advocates play an integral role, in my opinion, to understand the public sentiment about an issue, to make the legislators understand the public sentiment about an issue, and also keeps them motivated to act. And I think, and as Carol says, anybody can be an advocate. So here I am. I think I've landed at the right spot with Fair Districts PA. And to say that this is where the action is a bit of an understatement. I think gerrymandering is a pertinent and urgent issue with large-scale repercussions, and the LACRA bill is a solid solution. I think the LACRA bill demands transparency. It demands inclusion in the process of redistribution. It's about accountability in maintaining clear standards while dividing constituencies and municipalities. The LACRA bill provides better guardrails to ensure a fair drawing of lines and a mindful, non-partisan, voter-friendly distribution of counties, which will have long-term, large-scale impact. And this is my favorite line. I was kicked about it. It is a non-partisan issue which requires a bipartisan effort to resolve. So I'm looking forward to being an advocate and doing the work and not just sit on the sidelines. And I hope you guys are coming with me. And now you will hear from my fellow advocate, James Highland.
Yeah, my name is Jim Highland. I'm from Grove City, Pennsylvania. When I was younger, starting a career in a family, I felt that I was too busy to get involved with being an advocate for state government. And looking back, I wish that I had tried because I've seen over the years so many roadblocks being erected that get in the way of good government. And one of the largest being the gerrymandering that we've been talking about. And so that's why I started getting involved in fair districts about 3 or 4 years ago, working at polling stations to get signatures, working at other events such as the Grove City College Trade Show, to get signatures for the various things fair districts has been advocating over the last few years. And now, of course, working with legislators in my home district and nearby districts to get them to sign on to LACRA and similar legislation. So I've found this to be challenging, but also invigorating. When I talk to people about these issues, I have a sense that a lot of people see that things in the system aren't working well. And it's just that they misunderstand often what it is that I'm advocating. So I try to give them a chance to say that their spiel, so to speak, and then I respond. One instance I remember, there was a gentleman who was very upset with judges drawing legislative lines and didn't want judges drawing legislative lines. So I listened to him for a while, and then I told him, yeah, I agree with you. Judges shouldn't be drawing legislative lines. That's why we need legislation to deal with the gerrymandering so that judges don't have to do that. And after about 10 minutes, he signed the petition, and a few other people signed as well who were listening. So if you take the time to listen, if you take the time to let people know, they're upset, you're upset, and you're trying to find a way to fix things, you can often find common ground that way. And so I try to do that when I speak with legislators as well. I think of legislators as busy people. They're also people being pressured by their caucus leaders, by the people higher up in the hierarchy of their party to vote certain ways. That can't be all that much fun. So I try to again, listen to what they have to say. Sometimes they will already have an opinion about what I'm advocating before I get to say anything. And oftentimes it's not correct. So I listen to them carefully, listen to their reasons, and try to make sure that if I can't jot it down, someone else is jotting it down as well. Some of the tips that Tony gave before, because that's important as we move forward with other sessions with the same legislator. But I try to let them know that I understand what they're going through and that I can get them better information. And so if I don't have it there, then I make sure to get it to them later on. It's actually a good thing because it gives me an excuse to call them back and say, hey, I've got that information that you wanted. Can we talk about it? And so then I can set up a second session if I couldn't get them to agree with the legislation the first time around. Aside from the tips for talking with legislators that Carol has shared with folks and may share again, I try to just assume that the legislators have a belief in a robust democracy, and then I try to remind them what that's like. Every legislative district matters, every legislator matters. They shouldn't be treated just like votes that their caucus leaders are collecting. Their voice should be heard, and I want to hear their voice. I want to hear what they have to say, and then I want to try to get them to stand up for their own district, so that that district gets just as much time dealing with legislation as the districts that are being represented by the small handful of people that control the redistricting process right now. So I believe LACRA would move us towards a more fair way of doing that and give us better representation in the end.
My name is Ruth Yeiser, and I've been helping to coordinate this March Towards Transparency, which we've started to hear a little bit about. So the March Towards Transparency is really more of an all-out sprint, and you don't have to leave your couch. We're aiming to set up constituent Zoom meetings with every legislator in the Commonwealth in March. Teams of constituents will be assigned to a captain. The captain will prepare the constituents for the legislator meeting, facilitate the meeting, and report back to Fair Districts PA about the meeting. Captains are taking responsibility for 1 to 5 legislative districts, and we currently have captain bandwidth to meet with over 175 legislators. And if just a fraction of the people who are on this call today who haven't already signed up to be a captain, fill out that captain form. We will have the captain bandwidth to cover the entire state. If you've visited with, or if you've talked with a legislator before, and if you've been following redistricting reform, you'd make a great captain. Sign up. We'll provide training and materials, and we will find the volunteer constituents. Just a little aside, I've helped out with some presentations in southeastern Pennsylvania, and I've heard kind of the following from participants. Both my rep and my senator support redistricting reform. Legislators in the middle of the state won't listen to me. I'm not their constituent, so what can I do? Well, here's something you can do. Sign up to be a captain. You don't need to be a constituent to be a captain. For example, I understand constituents just met with the senator from District 19. If everyone who's on this call who lives in District 19 signs up to be a captain, we'll be amazingly close to having captain bandwidth to set up meetings with all of our legislators. In addition to captains, we need constituents, lots and lots and lots and lots of constituents from everywhere. If everyone who is on this call signs up to be a volunteer constituent, our volunteer bandwidth to talk to legislators will be enormous. So if you haven't done so already, sign up to be a constituent volunteer. You'll get talking points and training from your captain. And here's a secret. If you sign up to be part of the volunteer constituent team, there are roles on the team that don't require talking or don't involve much talking at all. Volunteering to talk to your legislator on behalf of Fair Districts PA means that you will be working in a totally nonpartisan capacity. This truly unique and positive experience allows you to connect with voters of all political backgrounds around a shared belief that the map drawing process should be transparent and fair, and that the resulting districts should reflect the will of the voters. So sign up and then share that volunteer link with people you know across the state. We need constituents to sign up from every district, from every corner of the state, from rural to urban and suburban. And so with that plug for our March Towards Transparency, I want to introduce Rep. Pam Delissio of the 194th District. She represents parts of Philadelphia and Montgomery counties, and she's been a stalwart supporter of redistricting reform like forever. She's been a wonderful ally. She's held countless town halls. She's given us guidance and advice, and she's going to offer her guidance of advocacy from her perspective as a legislator.
Ruth, thank you so much. I am halfway between Harrisburg and Philadelphia here. I was in the Capitol yesterday and today for appropriation hearings. For this session, I am the minority chair of the Children and Youth Committee, and today the Department of Human Services testified. So I, of course, left my notes at home in Philadelphia, but pulled over on the turnpike here in time to make notes. I've been on the call since 4 o'clock to listen to all the sharing and wisdom that has gone on. And I will occasionally be looking down because I don't want to miss any of these high points. They're not in any particular order, except for the very first one. And the very first one is a heartfelt thank you, thank you, thank you for raising your voices, for being involved, even if you've just joined, for being newly involved, or if you've been involved in this effort for the past 4 years. Have no doubt that your voices do make a difference. You may be familiar with House Bill 38, which was referred to as judicial gerrymandering. Here we are trying to stop gerrymandering of congressional districts and state Senate and state rep districts. And some folks wanted to add judicial districts to the mix for that opportunity to gerrymander. And make no mistake, it was your raised voices that stopped that bill in its tracks. Now, it's not gone, it's not dead. Nothing's dead till November 30th, 2022 at midnight. But it will not be on the May ballot, and we'll deal with it after that to see if it starts moving, and we'll just mobilize the forces again if we need to. So please know that. As I've listened to the conversation back and forth and listened to volunteers share their experience with legislators, let me offer my perspective as that legislator. And before coming into the legislature, the last 10 years, my tenure has been 10 years, this is my 11th year, I was very active in my state trade association. I chaired our public policy committee, So a little bit familiar with things in Harrisburg and in Washington, but this is a very different perspective with the office I hold currently. First of all, I didn't hear anybody mention virtual versus in-person meetings. I know I am holding no in-person meetings at the current time. Virtual meetings could be just a conference call, or they can be like we're doing here via Zoom or Microsoft Teams or another platform. So that would be an important part, but it's actually a good part because more people, it's easier to assemble. People don't have to travel. I saw one question in the chat that said, is it worth making a solo trek to Harrisburg? When we're in Harrisburg on session days, our schedules are almost totally unpredictable. You don't know what committee meetings are going to be called at the last minute, what other types of things are going on. So I think the virtual meeting is in our favor at the moment. Respect everybody's time. When I'm in Harrisburg and do take meetings in Harrisburg, because of the nature of what happens up there, 15 minutes, that's it. 15 minutes, you better not so much have it well rehearsed, but you better have it honed. And then when I'm in the district, I need to limit it to 30 minutes. And that is not an artificial construct. It's just that the day is so busy. A couple of weeks ago, I had 18 meetings in 4 days. So citizens, I have seen more citizens become involved in advocacy in the past year than I have seen in my previous 9 years, where at the end of the day, maybe there was 100 unanswered emails in my inbox. For a long time, it was 800. Now we're down to 300. So, but that engagement on behalf of my constituents and other citizens throughout the Commonwealth, to me, is heartening. I don't feel like I'm in this by myself. So if the legislator tells you you have 30 minutes and you're going to use 10 or 12 minutes of those times for small talk, then the meat of the matter has just been reduced to 18. And unfortunately, I've seen groups kind of chew up their time and never really get to the heart of the matter, which is unfortunate. Please know that on average, 3,800 bills between the House and Senate are introduced every 2 years. Last year, I believe it was 4,000, or the last session, it was 4,200. And of that, on average, 3,800, because my office follows these statistics, under 8% are signed into law. So under 300 bills are signed into law. So right then and there, the odds are sort of not in our favor. But I have seen when the political will is focused and the political will wants something to happen, I've seen a bill go from being introduced to the governor's desk in less than 4 days. So when folks tell you they're running out of time, they're full of baloney. When they tell you we don't know if we can accommodate this on the voting schedule, they're full of baloney. Because when they want it to happen, it can and it has happened. And if I have to dig up chapter and verse, I will in my not so spare time. In terms of co-sponsorship memos, let me give you a heads up. This is at least how I operate. I sign on to very few pieces of legislation, number one, because again, not all 3,800 are House bills, but a goodly portion are. I want to read the legislation first, particularly if it's a bill that's complicated, highly nuanced, or very impactful. And I want to read the legislation because the devil is always in the details. So, for instance, a few years ago, for redistricting bills that were supported by fair districts, House Bill 22, and I can't remember the other name. One was Tom Mertz's bill, the other was Steve Samuelson. And I may have been the session before that in 2018, 110 co-sponsors, an all-time record, at least for that session. You only need 102 votes to pass the bill out of the House. Well, 110 co-sponsors is indicative of not a lot in many situations, because I think legislators knew leadership had no intention of moving that bill. So you sort of got your cake and you got to eat it too. So you got to sign on to appease your constituents, but you knew it wasn't going to move anywhere, so you'd never have to vote for it. So, you know, I've shared with Carol Kuniholm the advocacy chart that I did that is a little overwhelming, but it's the reality of the situation, and knowledge is power. And I am impressed with the amount of knowledge that you all have accumulated over the last several years. And I am beyond impressed with how you continue to use that power as a result of that knowledge. So hopefully the chart helps. But so if you say, will you consider co-sponsoring it? That's part one of the question as far as I'm concerned. I think you also need to ask, at what point will you let me know whether or not you can vote for the bill? Keeping in mind that that bill could change drastically in committee. So what somebody co-sponsors may not be what gets voted out of committee, and what is on the floor may be further amended. So they may withdraw their co-sponsorship. I've seen that happen, or they may just choose to vote no. So lots of different scenarios can take place there. LACRA is a bipartisan effort. Wendi Thomas is the prime sponsor. I believe I heard today that it was introduced by Pat Beaty. I know Wendi was waiting for that to come out of the Legislative Reference Bureau. And I don't know, I saw it in the chat where how many, if there is a bipartisan effort for this. Again, those are all good questions, but we have to be careful as to what that information actually means. We don't need, you know, kind of to be lulled by the fact that, you know, if 40 people are signed on and they're 20 from each party, that certainly does sound encouraging. But the important thing is the chair of the committee to which the bill has been referred, and I don't know if the bill has been referred to a committee yet. Friday was a non-voting session day, so it may have been referred last week to a committee, or it may not be referred till we're back in session on the 15th. So, you know, is the chair of the committee where it will be referred inclined to hold a hearing on it? That would be great, an informational meeting, and ultimately to vote it out of committee. And then is the majority leader inclined to put it on the voting schedule? And then the Speaker of the House has to be inclined to bring it up for a vote. And then, of course, it's rinse and repeat in the Senate unless the Senate bill comes over to the House. So please, if you get frustrated, vent to anybody on this call. Don't quit. We will fail if we quit. So we can't quit. We can't. And I will be here, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I was told I have 8 minutes. I shut my car off, so I don't know what time it is. I hope I didn't run over. I have the agenda.
I'm next. Thanks so much, Pam. So we're going to introduce Wendi Thomas. She is the prime sponsor for LACRA in the House, which is HB 22. We're very thankful for her continued leadership, and we're going to welcome her thoughts on why the reform matters and her ideas on how to advocate with your legislators and best practices. So welcome, Wendi.
Yes, Pam is a great partner, and for the record, I second everything she said. However, that it did get introduced, it did come out of LRB finally, and it is referred to state government. So that's where it is as of Friday. So it is in the committee. Your advocacy absolutely matters. It matters to all of us. I will also say that, you know, I'm only on my 3rd year, but the volume of constituent involvement in the last year, I want to say, has been 10 times what it was my 1st year in the House. And so there are a lot of people who are involved and writing to us, but that's good. I'd also say that as you advocate for people, and to the point of asking for a half hour and wanting to talk about this, it's a great idea to go on the website and read a little bit about the legislator before you go in, so you know a little bit about their background and some things that they might be interested in and concerned about in addition to your advocacy for this. So if you do a little bit of research, not hours and hours before you talk to a legislator, you're breaking the ice, can go very quickly. Couple comments about things they're interested in, what they're doing, and then why you're there and what you're asking for. I do think that if you get if we can get a real good volume of co-sponsors, it helps me make the case to the committee chair, to leadership, to run the bill. But you could, if you have somebody who's really interested in the bill, you could ask them to also talk to leadership about making it a priority. Because legislators can talk to their leadership about what bills they really think need to run. So if you've got somebody, they're willing to co-sponsor, they say they're really interested in it, it's very important to them, you can get them to that point, you can ask them to also ask leadership to put on the priority list that it's something they'd really like to see run, or ask state government committee to really run it. So we will be working hard over the next month. I think the delay in the census data is twofold. If we had been getting it at the end of April, the crunch to get this bill passed, I think would have been a little more. I think this gives us a little more time to get this bill actually out of committee and going. And a hearing would be great, but a hearing doesn't get the bill passed, just to be clear. A hearing may make more people comfortable in voting for it, and that would be the goal if we have a hearing, to move it along. But our goal is still to get it, into committee, do whatever we need to do to make committee comfortable with the bill. I have been advocating for it as a transparency process. And I think that's a great story. I think most legislators want government to be transparent. So it's a very unifying message that everybody can get behind. So it's great work. Most of us, if not all of us, like hearing from our constituents. So don't hesitate to reach out. Don't be intimidated to reach out. We are all here trying to do the people's work, and hearing from people who are interested in state government is really a good thing. So I'm happy to hang out, answer any questions if anybody has them, or.
Yeah, that would be great. We're going to move into the question and answer section, and Pam and Wendi, if you could stay with us, if any of the questions, let's see if I can get one that would relate for you guys. This isn't specific to LACRA, but I think it would be a good explanation for those of us who are learning. Could we expand on the sunshine laws, and what are those?
Sunshine laws are notice. You talk about transparency. They could be more transparent. For instance, committee meetings can still be called from the floor with basically no notice. In my 10 years, I've actually gone to committee meetings to vote on legislation, and I didn't even know what bills were running in that committee. But there are kind of these, if you will, loopholes built into the sunshine laws that will allow a chairperson or to run a bill with virtually no notice, and that means no notice to the public. If the legislator has no notice, you don't have any notice, and therefore the ability to respond or have input. Fortunately, it's done less. In my early years, it was done with a little bit of alarming frequency because these were not emergencies. So I don't know. This doesn't, unless I'm missing something, Wendi, this doesn't really tie into that, but the concept of transparency, I agree. We don't want an opaque. I don't think many of our colleagues want this to be opaque.
And I've only ever had it happen once. So Pam, to your point that maybe it happened more early.
Before.
Yeah, for the most part, it's about, notice of discussion and topics and bills that are coming up.
So one of them is who would run or maintain the website created by LACRA?
Okay, I can take that one. So LACRA requires the Legislative Data Processing Center, which is an existing agency that supports the legislature and supports the legislature and the Legislative Reapportionment Commission, specifically in the redistricting process, and has done that in the past. So they would be the ones that would have to set up the website.
Okay. Another question is around definitions of protections for minorities or communities of interest, responsiveness. Could that be expanded upon a little bit?
Well, I think I may have seen that question in the chat somewhere about, why are the definitions there? They certainly help, I think, in any piece of legislation to provide more clarity to the terminology that you're talking about. And they also help when, in this particular instance, if a map is challenged in the courts, the court will then look to the definitions too. You can talk about the concept of communities of interest, for example, and people may think they know what that means, or it means something to them and might mean something else to somebody else. But when you have a definition, then the court would then turn to that, and that's what a community of interest is, what the bill says it is. So, and the same with the other terms.
Okay.
Let me jump in and say, I think part of the question was for a larger explanation of those. And there are some really terrific explainers, one-page explainers on the Princeton gerrymandering page for Pennsylvania's redistricting process. And I would really encourage, if you are going to go and speak about this, just be aware that those are there. You don't have to read them necessarily. You don't have to memorize them. But if a question comes up, then there's a really good one-page explainer about communities of interest. There's a really good one-page explainer about responsiveness. Some of the other terms that are there. So if a question comes up, you don't have to answer it. You don't have to be the expert. You just need to be able to say, I can get that information for you. And then you can send a link to the page to the legislator or their staff. So just remember, you don't have to have all the answers, but if you do want to read more, I would recommend that you take a look at those pages.
We have another question. What are the greatest objections or rationale for objecting to LACRA by legislators?
Well, I think last session, it was introduced late in the session, right, Wendi? It was the fall. And so then it may have legitimately been timing, but again, we have seen bills go to the governor's desk in days. So I haven't really spoken to too many of my colleagues yet. We were in session the week of the 11th of January, the week of the 25th, and for 3 days, the week of the 1st. We've been on appropriations hearings, and because we're virtual together, we don't pass each other in the hall, because even those who may be going to the Capitol may be limiting themselves to their office. So they're not even going to the floor. Wendi and I are usually on the floor. I know I've been since this began, but it's a very different dynamic. So we're trying to now educate our colleagues. So I think the rhythm is very different and has been for the past year. And Wendi, I'm playing off your remarks from the other week. You had made these comments.
I was a freshman or first year legislator in 19, and you'd have a casual conversation with somebody you knew, but you didn't know that well, maybe on the other side of the aisle, even in your own party sometimes, about a subject because it just came up and you could get their perspective, which you didn't know about, or you kind of have these casual conversations. And since the pandemic, you sign up for the meetings you go to, and oftentimes they're directed. The opportunity for casual conversation, and in fact, Pam and I saw each other there. I'm like, hi, I'm like in person, hello. I mean, and it's kind of a sad thing because there's a lot of really good conversation that happens on the House floor with people you don't have their cell phone number, you don't call them, etc. So, I feel like I've seen like people seem to come back in waves. Everybody's trying to get their comfort zone. Hopefully we'll get these vaccines out and we can all be back in person. I definitely think that would help. But, I think we could have said timing. The COVID virus has just taken over every conversation. We get hundreds of calls about vaccines every day right now. So, it's just been one of those years where it seems like there's an urgent topic of the minute. We're getting thousands of calls about that topic for a period of time. But this is timely, and the districts are going to have to be drawn soon. And so I think the urgency for this topic is certainly there.
This might be a question for Mark and Pat, but also maybe for Wendi and Pam, just from your experience as legislators. But some people are asking questions that legislators who don't really seem to care about democracy, or might be really resident to not comfortable with what the what the bill is, or maybe not even willing to talk to you, how do you handle that meeting or that engagement?
I don't know if any of my colleagues are not interested in democracy. I think that, you know, look, even in my email, and I have a Democratic performing district with an index of like 68% or something. So if I lose and I've had a primary every single election and a general election. So I have been a little bit, I've gotten a little tiny smidge of a taste of sort of, what do they refer to them as, trolls, or folks who think that it is perfectly acceptable to be less than civil. I mean, I want to go show up on their door and say, I'm here, do you mind repeating that? My staff won't let me. They're like, you don't know what's on the other side of the door, because I'm really curious as to what gives permission to people to behave that way. My Republican colleagues, from what they're sharing, I am beyond horrified at what is happening in their world, beyond horrified. So I think everybody is advocating for democracy. It's the rare, I mean, maybe they have a different way of going about it, but I am very concerned for the majority of colleagues in the majority party who are experiencing this horrific treatment that is spilling over and impacting their personal lives. I mean, I have folks saying, you know, hey, maybe I wish I didn't even run. Who needs that kind of thing? We need to be particularly supportive of folks and to help them understand what this is. So I know it didn't exactly answer the question. Wendi, maybe you can help answer it better, but I am extremely empathetic, and we need to understand what some of these, so they're playing to a base, which I refuse to do. That, you know, I refuse to play to a base, let the chips fall where they may, but because all we're going to have is gridlock. So
I think the heart of the question is that we should go in thinking everybody does care about democracy and everybody's interested. You know, there's always bad actors in any group. Legislature's no different, you know, that's fine. But the majority of people do care. And I think if you're having somebody who you feel is stonewalling you for one reason or another, or doesn't view this, I still say, take time to read their website, find out what they are interested in. Try to find a little common ground in something that's important to them to start the conversation, at least. I know you should be honest about why you're there. You're there to talk about their districts, and that's important to you and why. But you know, I think some of the negativity that maybe some people feel when they're advocating is the person thinks they already know what the other person's going to say, and nobody's listening to anybody. So I would recommend, you know, try to find a common ground. So other than that, yes, you should know we have people coming at us that it's much decline now. But even with the vaccines, I've had people cursing and screaming. I mean, yeah. As soon as we pick up the phone, it's really, I don't know when it became okay to do that, but and nonpartisan issue. They just so you know, be nice, be yourself, advocate strongly for what you want, and if somebody's a little challenging, maybe try to learn a little bit about them. That's my recommendation.
I think too, for policy, you know, for many of the folks who at least appear to us to be not in favor of redistricting reform, oftentimes it's not because they don't believe in democracy, it's because they believe in what they think is superior policy for the benefit of the Commonwealth, right? I'm a member of one party or the other because I believe in a certain set of principles that can be very wide-ranging depending upon who in the party is speaking, right? So we find that there are both Republicans and Democrats who are behind our bills, and we find members of both parties who think that there is some benefit to gerrymandering as an American tradition. And so when we approach that, the key issue, I think, and our representatives would agree, is civility. Let's not get pulled down into behaviors that we find objectionable. And you may be surprised that it's equally important that a legislator who is not favorably disposed to redistricting reform needs to know that we're out there, that we have civil people across the Commonwealth who need to tell them that you may not vote for us ultimately or with us, but you need to know we're here.
One of the other questions is just what does run the bill mean? And then and then a follow-up to that, it would be what are the challenges and what can we do to get leaders to run the bill? What can we as advocates do to get leaders to take action?
I think I used that term. I'm sorry. I really apologize. Run the bill. Run the bill means they put it up for a vote. Very simply, they run out of committee. They run it on the House floor. That might be my lingo, so I apologize for that. But it just means they put it up for a debate and a vote. I think the first step to getting leadership to understand it is to get some more co-sponsors on the bill to show that there's people there. But at the end of the day, certainly calling on leaders is one avenue, but we have to have representatives who are also telling leadership it's an important topic and they want it run.
As both of our guest representatives have made clear, you've got to get out there and ask multiple questions. Yes, co-sponsor, and yes, will you vote for it if it comes forward? But we often ask our volunteers to say, can you bring this up at your caucus meetings and ask it to be a priority? Can you speak with the chair of your committee, whether it's the majority or the minority chair, to get some activity? So I think I think Representative Thomas made the comment how difficult it is to interact with each other in these COVID times. But whatever we can do to encourage members across the state to talk to leadership by phone or however, the more effective it'll be. So I think it is more than one ask. Yes, the bill is important, but how they promote the bill is going to be helpful.
One question I would ask is, some people feel like the first thing we should do kind of almost every time is we should start doing those bulk emails, those click and send emails. Are those ever helpful? Is there ever a time to do those?
I will share that I got roughly 100,000 emails in the month of December.
Wow.
How many do you think I read? It's humanly impossible. And I'm a person who tries to go through my form letter emails, I call them, and find my constituents so that I am responsive to my constituents. It's humanly impossible. So I am going to be straight up. I still, now that I'm not getting that volume, I still try to look through them. But if I miss anything, it's a form email.
We have an interesting question here from Mark. What about asking what I think they mean the legislators, think we should do to be more effective?
Actually, that's a great question, and I'm going to sort of reverse it to our two representatives. Earlier, Representative Delissio mentioned that we were so effective in stopping, at least for now, the judicial gerrymandering bill. So what did we do from your legislators' perspective in that effort that we should apply to this effort?
Well, there was a broad coalition of organizations as well, Mark. And I think then colleagues, Wendi, you may have been one of them, having to put that bill up for a vote would have put some of our colleagues in jeopardy. Am I saying this as accurately as I can, Wendi? And Wendi, just jump in there. So that I think then part of it was the strategy of who was hearing from folks. And again, we answer to our own constituents. So when, I get, 400 emails from west of the Susquehanna, if I'm not sitting on the committee that's voting, if I'm sitting on the committee and I hear from people west of the Susquehanna, I think that's fair game for me. But if it's a for vote and they're not my constituents and they're like, we're watching how you vote. And I'm like, well, then pass the popcorn because, you are just watching. Because there's nothing, unless you know half my district better than I do, I'm going to vote to represent my district. So I think part of that was strategically trying to get those constituents in the districts where that may have been a bad vote for, and then we'll be explaining what a bad vote is, a bad vote for some colleagues to put up, And those colleagues went to their leadership that said, no, don't stop. And they heard from enough that it did it. And, you know, Wendi may be able to explain it a little bit better, but that's the gist of what I've discerned from the effort. Plus a broad coalition of organizations. I mean, they were getting it from every possible side.
I agree on the broad coalitions. I think the big difference in that is you had people that lean towards both parties, or even you had Republican counties saying we don't want this. You know, like it wasn't D's or R's. It was a bipartisan message from a lot of people. So the constituent emails on that definitely made a difference. Everybody knew them, but I think the swaying was also there were bipartisan groups coming from all different angles saying we don't think this move's a good idea.
So one strategy, Mark, maybe to go get that list of that broad coalition of organizations, see where they stand on LACRA, and see if you can get them to participate again.
I think in part the good news there is as we collaborated with those other organizations, we saw a significant jump in the number of folks who signed on to help with fair districts. And we think many of those folks came from some of those organizations who said, boy, judicial gerrymandering was bad, but now we get it, what fair districts is trying to do. And so that may be at least a partial window to helping us. And the fact that we're seeing, in fact, those new members have come from almost every district in Pennsylvania, places where we really hadn't seen a lot of membership in fair districts before.
So we're at 5:27, so I'm going to hand it back to Carol just to wrap it up. And just one more great thank you to Wendi and Pam for joining us.
And thank you to everybody who was part of this. Thank you to our volunteers who shared their experience. Thank you to our advocacy advisors, to Tony for joining training, for Mark for joining the Q&A, for Pat for explaining LACRA. I want to just close by saying that we do need to reach out in as broad a way as we can, and that takes creativity. And so some of you had really good suggestions in the chat about why not reach out to this group or why not to reach out to that group. I would say all of us need to be reaching out as broadly as we can in this. And many of you helped get resolutions passed by county commissioners. This would be a good time to go back to those county commissioners and say, can you contact our legislator right here and say, we want this bill to get passed? That would be one outreach. Or some of those other organizations. I've been talking to organizations saying, can you just draft a letter from your board saying we want this bill passed? And so as creatively as we can, we have worked hard. We've had lots of letters to the editor. We've got lots of people who sign petitions, but this is the time to kind of leverage all of that in one direction as creatively and loudly as we can and politely as we can to say we want these bills passed. I think it's also really important to remember not everybody, we think we've read the bill, we know what it's about, we're asking for it. We need to go to our legislators and make sure that they understand what we're asking, because many think we're still asking for an independent commission. Many think the legislators still need to draw the lines. Yeah, this doesn't change that. So we need to explain the bill carefully, even to people who don't think that they are on our side. We need to explain the bill, explain what it's doing, explain why it's doing that. And then also say, if you have an objection, what is the objection? I think we need to go to that and say, if you have a problem, what is the problem? Is there a part of the bill that you don't like? What is the part of the bill? We will take that feedback. So I think there was a question early on about, and we didn't get to answering it, what parts of the bills have to stay as they are? I would say the goal is to get reform passed. And if that means the bill gets changed, I think we're all open to some changes. What those changes would be negotiation. So we're not going to start by saying, hey, you can take half the bill, that's fine. That's not the way you negotiate. You start by saying, we think this is the best possible bill and we want it the way it is. But if there has to be something that comes out of it to get the bill passed, that would be a conversation. It would be a conversation with the sponsors and with the folks who have been looking at the bill carefully. But we want some reform. We want a transparent process. We want better criteria. We want the public involved. And if we have to take out a phrase here or two in the bill, I think Representative Thomas would agree. That's a negotiation that would be had. So if there's a legislator who says, yeah, it's a good bill, but there's some things I don't like, write it down. Say, thank you, that's really helpful information. And we'd like to understand what you don't like about it and why, and we'll report that back. That information would be super helpful. To just say, no, I'm not interested at all, that's not a good conversation. You want to have a good conversation. You want to report back what you learned and report back on our report back forms, and we'll continue having that conversation. It's really it's a national conversation about how do we go from a place where people feel demoralized about elections to feeling like they're really engaged and really heard. That's the conversation we want to have. We want everybody to be part of that. And I really like what Representative Thomas said, start from the assumption that we have something in common and we're all wanting the same thing. And I think both of our representatives have said, when we start from the assumption that everybody is against us and they're on the other side, we've lost before we've started. We have to start from the assumption that something in each person there wants to represent their constituents. And how do we get to that place where constituents feel represented? And that has to be having fair maps has to be a piece of that conversation. So we want to have the conversation, find out what they think would be the best thing to do. And we want to get this reform passed, and we want to do it soon. There were some questions about timeline. We really don't know. We're still trying to understand what the data delay would actually do to the timeline, but we do know this would need to get passed soon to really be in place in time for 2021 redistricting. So that's why we're sprinting at this point in our marathon. Thank you all for being part of that. We look forward to continuing to work together. Thank you for being here today.